Hello, everyone, and welcome back to NCOIL One-on-One. With us here today is Kevin McKechnie, Executive Director of the American Bankers Association Health Savings Account Council. Kevin, thank you so much for taking the time.
Thanks for having me. It's an honor to be here, and I appreciate it greatly.
It's great. So let's kick things off with asking how you first kind of got your start working on public policy.
Interesting story, probably only to me, but the public policy urge was always bright, and I moved here to Washington, D.C. in 1988 and pursued graduate studies in American history and government, and then made my way to Capitol Hill, as a lot of people do, and ended up working for a couple of Republican members of the House, where, among other things, I worked on health affairs, military affairs, and things like that. When it was time to move on from the House of Representatives, I went to Marsh and McLennan, their Affinity Services Division. I worked there as a broker, working on more or less the same kind of healthcare issues that I saw in the House. That was an interesting time, and it's because the Gramm-Leach-Bliley Act was passed during that time in 1999, 25 years ago. And ABA at the time was looking for someone who understood and was licensed to sell insurance and securities, and that would be me. They wanted them to help form affiliates, both operations of which are still here, and one which is clearly still here, the ABA Securities Association. And as you know from our work together, the Insurance Office of Insurance Advocacy here at ABA as well.
That's great. So can you provide us some background on the ABA and kind of what you do in your current role?
Happily, why don't we start with GLBA? It's been 25 years. Banks formed these subsidiaries, and a lot of them were quite large. Contemporaneously, you know that Truist was getting out of the insurance business because it had to improve its capital position. It sold the most valuable part of its portfolio, which was its insurance operations. And I think that's true around most holding companies. Insurance distribution is the best way to enhance non-interest income without increasing your risk profile. And that makes it very attractive to banks. Banks also launched broker-dealer operations of the sort that Fidelity and Schwab have long made famous. And they've worked on retirement investment products. We work on those issues here as well because Gramm-Leach-Bliley allowed us to keep those customers in-house. We also, as you're probably well aware, ABA is 150 years old, and so it helps all of its member banks manage the various operations in their holding company. And I suppose lastly, the thing that has popped up in the last, say, 20 years has been health savings accounts. And I founded and run the Health Savings Account Council after participating in the legislative and then regulatory effort to bring these into being. And now there are literally tens of millions of Americans who finance their health care with health savings accounts, and we represent 94% of that business as a division within the American Bankers Association.
That's great. And so then how did that kind of parlay you coming into NCOIL and getting involved? And what's the ABA's position, ABA's involvement been like throughout the past few years?
Sure. Well, part of the Gramm-Leach-Bliley debate in 1999, it lasted a lot longer than that, and there was going to be a role for the federal government in agency and brokerage licensing. And so prior to joining ABA, we at Marsh, we had participated at NCOIL and at National Association of Insurance Commissioners just to get our arms around what might be an opportunity. And of course, that really brings it to the fore when your role changes. You're no longer a government relations representative and a broker for a private company, public company. Now you're in charge of insurance as a public policy question for bank holding companies and their customers. And so that brought us to the gates of NCOIL when it was still it was called the Conference of Insurance Legislators for a long time. And being in NCOIL as a conference and as a council now, same experience in a lot of ways, but it was that exposure to how public policy is made in insurance that NCOIL does best. And so you can't afford not to be there with a role like mine. You have to go.
That's great. Well, we're certainly always better off having your perspective at the meetings too, Kevin. So it's
Glad to
mutual.
be
Can you tell us what some of ABA's top policy priorities in 2024 are, both generally and then kind of as it relates to NCOIL's corner of the world?
Happy to help. ABA CEO Rob Nichols, he'd be delighted to get this question because it would allow him to talk about the tsunami of federal regulatory activity, most of it punitive, facing the banking industry. He'd also talk about economic challenges of high inflation, rising energy prices, the difficulty defining risks associated with federal regulators' focus on climate change, that kind of thing. The other issues that are particular to NCOIL um, involve some of our lending products. And so a lot of focus now on mortgages and the federal government's interest in appropriately insuring those mortgages. You have to go to NCOIL to find out how that's going. In our last couple of meetings together, there have been sessions on disasters and what kind of response might be appropriate. Our recommendation, of course, was to follow the successful path blazed by health savings accounts and create disaster savings accounts. And in this capacity, NCOIL has been perhaps the most helpful of any of the state groups by embracing the issue and truly understanding the product class and then debating how best it could help the challenges in that industry, then creating model acts that do that in particular. And so very, very difficult to overstate the role NCOIL plays in state government deliberations.
Sounds like a very busy plate this upcoming year. How would you describe your overall experience with NCOIL as the organization has kind of grown and evolved?
Well, it's always been collaborative and therefore it's congenial. And it's a relationship-oriented model, and that is something I like more than anything else. It's because at some point you have to be able to talk to the heads of the insurance committees in all the various states without making your way through the usual red tape associated with government. And NCOIL provides that opportunity. Uh, when we were implementing GLBA, especially the producer licensing requirements, we saw NCOIL really stand forward, and that's because that law required either a reciprocal or uniform licensing regime across the states. That didn't emerge quickly. Part of the impetus for something called the Optional Federal Insurance Charter resulted, which is to try to get the NAIC to implement all of these more uniform or national changes. I think it encouraged them to do that, and one validation of this thesis is to point out that the National Producer Licensing Registry, I don't believe that would have come to the fore had the effort not been done. But anyway, it was a confrontational model. Nobody in state government wants to hear that there could be a change and it might be federally regulated. And in fact, it did not succeed. And that's generally probably a good thing at this point. But my point would be to you, the congenial flavor of NCOIL and the relationship building, which is there to this day, did not flag, even when the issues were a little more pointed than they are now. It was a very good experience.
It's great. So, in addition to general NCOIL participation, ABA is, of course, an active member of the NCOIL Corporate and Institutional Partners Program, which started almost a decade ago and has been a great source of financial stability for NCOIL, but has also been a great way to kind of facilitate year-round engagement. How would your experience as an NCOIL CIP member been like?
It's excellent. It was something that should have been built long before Tom came by, and I credit Tom Considine with doing this in collaboration with Indiana State Senator Travis Holdman. It was a very forward-thinking move because it enhanced the relationship building opportunities of companies and legislators. And not everyone was a convert, I guess, at the beginning, but I think it's the best way that the organization could have provided that kind of entree. And so hats off to NCOIL when they did it. And the proof is in the pudding. The model's working well, and it provides the legislators with very good, close, intimate data about what companies are thinking and what challenges they're facing.
That's great. So, as an active NCOIL attendee, do you have any advice for new people kind of coming into the organization to kind of hit the ground running and get the most out of participating?
Well, I do, and that is you have to be an activist. You can't just sit there and let NCOIL flow over you. It's not designed for that. If that's what you're up to, you're missing out. What you need is to get up and start meeting people. In my experience, there's no one working at NCOIL as a staff member or as a legislative member that doesn't want to hear your story and help you. And in any event, you're going to figure out um, where there are places your issues can be discussed and where perhaps there are other challenges. And so get going, engage with the elected officials, make sure you're participating in all of the various opportunities NCOIL provides, the golf outings coming, for example. These are ways to bind yourself to the group and introduce yourself to the group. So be active, get to it, go to the next meeting, keep it up for years. That's how you're successful.
All great advice. How would you describe your participation with NCOIL compared to other organizations at the state level, kind of like at the NAIC and CSG and
Hmm.
NCSL?
Well, I figured you'd ask me that because I go to almost all of the meetings, and just about all of those groups are different in one sense. So NCOIL really looks obviously just at insurance issues, but it's been branching out to other financial questions as it should, and overlap's probably a good idea. The thing that NCOIL does that those of us in the industry or the trade groups for the industry find enormously helpful is it invites state insurance regulators. And so they come when they're there as an audience as opposed to hosts. And the NAIC, obviously, uh, a regulatory body, I think we can get there. They have a great deal of work in front of them, committee after committee, after subgroup, after working group, after committee. And so it's difficult to get time with commissioners. NCOIL does a very good job of giving us access to those people because they're there as an audience. Now, the Conference of State Legislatures is huge. It tries to talk about everything and has 13 standing committees. Ironically, with the help of a former NCOIL president, Representative Brian Kennedy, they now again have a banking and insurance committee. I do not anticipate that standing committee to be just like NCOIL. It can't. It doesn't have the resources, but they'll try to provide a flavor to their membership of what the crises are, and that inures to all of our benefits. I can give you a couple of examples. They're mostly around health savings accounts. Uh, NCOIL does model acts. That's enormously helpful, very influential in state capitals. Council of State Governments does what's called suggested state legislation, which is to say picking an existing state law that's working. And we were able to do that in several different capacities around the HSA model, and they adopted it. And so there's two ways that those two groups help our advocacy teams as they try to help the millions of Americans with HSAs. NCSL can occasionally do a letter, and those letters are also helpful, but I would say at least within insurance, the ability to do a model law or a model act or a resolution at NCOIL and NAIC, this is the most horsepower you're going to see out of a national group of state officials, whether they're elected or appointed. It's very useful.
Great. So you mentioned it's important to have model laws and resolutions developed. As you know, our goal at NCOIL is to bring state legislators from all across the country into the room to kind of debate and develop model policy. How do you think that plays out in the state legislatures? Have you seen that have an impact throughout the states?
We have seen it have an impact around the states, and I can point to probably a dozen states that address NCOIL models almost word for word. They have not, just because they're not in the nature of a regulation, done what you see around NAIC models, where they're incorporated by reference. And I'm not sure I'm a fan of that legal strategy anyway. It means ceding legislative control to a regulatory body. And of course, our country is built on separation of powers. But the NCOIL models are stood up as the path you can follow if you want something that was built by consensus by chairs of insurance committees from all over the country, as opposed to the legislative dynamics in your own chamber. And so by definition, it's a powerful tool. In the example of, say, the copay accumulator stuff, which is an esoteric way of managing basically a pharmacy benefit for those that are watching, but it comes down to dollars and cents for HSA owners or for other healthcare participants. The way that we manage that with pharma through NCOIL hopefully is a model for just about anybody who wants to manage disparate stakeholders to a consensus resolution. It worked. It allowed states to do what they do and federal HSA rules to prevail if there's a conflict, and ultimately allows people access to cheaper medication, which I think is in everybody's best interest.
Certainly is. So we've seen meeting attendance at NCOIL grow over the past 5 years from an average of 225 to an excess of 350. Have you found it harder to make real, meaningful relationships? And if so, how do you kind of manage and combat that?
No, making all of those relationships work is the job of those that want to come and do that. And if there are people on your team that, despite all of the opportunities at NCOIL to go to the dinners, go to the meals, go to the receptions, go to the events, still can't find their way. Maybe they're in the wrong business. Maybe they're too shy. I don't know what else to say. This is not a shy business. No, NCOIL's growth inures to the benefit of all of us because it means its reach is growing. It means those model laws go farther and faster. The more states that are involved and the more people from the legislature in each of those states that are involved. And so I'm a huge fan of that. And I don't know anybody that won't be. Intimate groups of people is to be avoided. This isn't a coffee klatch. This is trying to get your arms around the greatest number of elected officials at the state level possible. And that number is big. Do you know what it is, by the way? Do you have any idea? It's
Yeah,
more than 7,200 elected state officials.
really.
That's a big universe to try to reach. And so the more NCOIL can reach and grab and gather resources to do both, the better for everybody.
That's great. So naturally, we've discussed some of the positive things about NCOIL, but there is, of course, always things we can improve on. How would you like to see the organization grow and evolve in the years to come?
Right. I don't think improvement is a negative word. Here, it's part of our cultural planning, which is to say, by definition, there's no year where you can do absolutely everything you wanted. And so improvement is a benefit add, not a benefit minus. What can NCOIL improve on? Well, we just talked about one. There are states that have yet to join. It's been the bane of every NCOIL executive director's existence since it was founded. And it's hopefully members like the American Bankers Association that help you convince those recalcitrant states to sign up. That's one way, and that would be a positive way. But I think that work is evergreen. It'll always be so, and so we should always be thinking about getting more people there. The other thing I would recommend, and that I tried to do at Tom's specific request, we were in California. Can we get California voices to bring an issue home, explain it to legislators in a very direct way? And so it's not something that they can't see and touch. They can walk out of the hotel and, oh yeah, I know what they were talking about. And so going to different places, getting local speakers to say federal issues or national issues might be very helpful. But again, that's all of our responsibility now, and it would inure to all of our benefit.
That's great. So before we let you go, we have a quick lightning round of questions for you. These are the real hard-hitting ones.
Uh-oh.
So can
Uh-oh.
you tell us your favorite all-time movie?
Easy. Thunderball.
You go
Sean Connery.
favorite all-time actor?
Well, Sean Connery and Costner are in a very close tie, I would say.
That's a fair debate on that. Favorite all-time food?
Well, look at the size of me. Buffalo wings. I'm from Toronto.
I might have to agree with you on that one for myself. Favorite all-time book or author?
That would have to be Christopher Hitchens.
Nice. Song or musical artist?
Probably Seal. He has a couple of songs, one of which was the wedding song to my wife. Why not like Seal?
It's probably an important one then. And a favorite all-time TV show?
Probably again another tie if you it's beyond your time horizon, but if you haven't seen WKRP in Cincinnati or Magnum PI, go back and watch them. Great
I'll add
stuff.
them to my list. And then last but not least, the three dinner party guests, living or dead.
Oh man. Well, Hitchens, because he's so articulate, Churchill, because he didn't like him, and so an argument would break out, and Jefferson, who would be a rebel at that table, and therefore maybe the best dinner guest of all time. That would be fun.
That is a very well thought out table. Give you credit
No, I
for
just got it there. I can think of more, but if I had to do it today, I'd do it with those three gentlemen.
That's great. All right. Well, this wraps up this month's NCOIL one-on-one interview with Kevin McKechnie, Executive Director of the American Bankers Association Health Savings Account Council. Kevin, thank you so much for taking the time.
Good to see you. See you next meeting.
Sounds good. See you in San Antonio.